Up until the past year or so, I was brainwashed. I was forced into believing something that is absolutely impossible. Schools teach evolution as if it's a fact. Because it's taught in this manner, it puts in place a social order. If you do not believe in evolution, you're looked down upon as a religious nut. But evolution can't exist. Not because the Bible says so, as some churches would state, but because the logic behind it simply does not add up. People are taught that evolution is a fact. The schools teach it, the Science Channel teaches it, the History Channel teaches it, the Discovery Channel teaches it. But the facts teach us that it cannot happen. Despite these evidences that show that evolution could not have occurred, it is so hard-pressed into the minds of people that no matter how many facts you show them, they will refuse to listen. They will laugh at the idea of anyone saying that they are wrong, or that they too have been brainwashed by society. I took the Bible and modified it to fit the social standard put into place by the schools. I've always believed in the Bible, but with a twist. My belief was that God created the Big Bang, then of course over billions of years the galaxy, our solar system, and eventually the Earth formed. Then, through even more billions of years, evolution took place, eventually leading to the formation of humans. This is the biggest conspiracy ever revealed, but for whatever reason it's hidden from the general public. Children are being brainwashed from the time they walk into school until the time they die. Let me start this presentation by stating an extraordinary claim. The Earth and the universe are not billions of years old, not millions of years old, not hundreds of thousands of years old. What if I said the universe is only roughly 6,000 years old? Absolutely ridiculous, right? That's what I thought the first time that statement was made to me. By the end of this presentation, I believe that your opinion on that statement will change greatly. Prior to listening to this, think about what evidence there actually is that proves that billions of years have occurred. For evolution to have a fighting chance in the scientific community, there would need to be a large amount of time, hence the billions of years theory. What evidence is there that the Earth has been here for billions of years? Carbon dating, fossil records, coal, canyons, and mountains. That list are the number one responses of those who are pro-evolution. These things, as claimed by evolutionists, prove that billions of years must have occurred. As I continue through the presentation, you will see that that is false. Okay, so let's start with carbon dating. With the data received from carbon dating techniques, the Earth is dated to be between 4.55 and 4.6 billion years old. Now there's already an obvious problem with this dating technique. If this technique is accurate, then why is there a 5 million year variation? Carbon dating works by measuring the amount of carbon-14 in objects, plants, and animals. The amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere is known, and it's believed that the same ratio of carbon-14 in the atmosphere would also be in the animals. It's a fair assumption. Plants take in carbon-14, animals eat plants, it works. Knowing the rate of radioactive decay, one can measure the amount of carbon-14 in the object, plant, or animal, and compare it to the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere. The problem is that there is a huge assumption being made that does not add up. For carbon dating to be accurate, the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere must remain constant. It was assumed that the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere was constant, so it wasn't a problem. Willard F. Libby, an evolutionist trying to prove carbon dating, found that it would take 30,000 years for the amount of carbon-14 entering the atmosphere and the amount of radioactive decay to reach equilibrium. Well, the Earth is billions of years old, right? So the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere must have reached equilibrium. The important thing to notice is that it hasn't. In fact, it's only about 1/3 of the way to reaching equilibrium. Carbon-14 is still forming 28 to 37% faster than it's decaying. This means two things. One, that the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere is not constant, therefore carbon dating will not work. And two, that the Earth is much younger than 30,000 years old. The problem is apparent when actually using carbon dating techniques. Carbon dating dated a living snail to be 27,000 years old. It's a little bit off, don't you think? The thing is that we do not know the age of the things being dated. Whatever carbon dating dates that particular item is the date that we must assume correct. But when there's something that already has a known age, it must be tested and retested again to match the age that it's known to be. The rest of the dates are thrown out the window. There are two dating techniques that are used to find the age of bones and fossils. They are carbon dating, which I've already shown you cannot work, and relative dating. Relative dating is determining the age of the bone or fossil by the rock layer it's found in. It's not meant to tell the exact time the being was alive, just the general time period. This general time period is determined with the geologic column. The layers were supposedly laid down over billions of years, slowly depositing the different fossils in specific layers of rock. You can see this when looking at the geologic column. The rock layers themselves are dated under the assumption that each new rock layer was laid down over billions of years, one on top of the other. This means that the fossil records would always be in the same order all around the world. If this were actually the case, it would be an accurate assumption, but it's not. The geologic column is nothing but a drawing. This is shown to students to prove to them that evolution has occurred, but this formation of fossils is not found anywhere in the world. The Grand Canyon is over a mile deep, and even there, you'll see that all the fossils are jumbled up and flipped upside down. The fossil layers that are meant to be older are above the fossil layers that were supposed to be younger. It's almost as though the fossils were laid down abruptly at approximately the same time period. Almost as though there was a global flood that had taken place, rapidly killing and burying all of the animals. But if there was a global flood, the evidences would be overwhelming. If there were a global flood, we would expect to see the entire Earth covered in layer upon layer of sedimentary rock laid down by water, each of which would be filled with the skeletal remains of different species of animals. Take another look at the geologic column. It appears as though the Earth is covered by layer upon layer of sedimentary rock laid down by water, each of which is filled with skeletal remains of tons of different species of animals. Shocking, isn't it? Not only does the geologic column not actually show how fossils were laid down, for evolution to have taken place over billions of years, some creatures would slowly mutate into other creatures. If this were the case, there would be transitional stages. Think about a turtle. What animal did a turtle come from? A lizard, right? Entirely makes sense. The lizard's rib cage would have slowly expanded over millions of years until eventually it formed a shell. If this were true, we would be able to see the change in the structure of the lizard all the way up until the point where it becomes a turtle, but we don't. We find fossils of lizards and fossils of turtles. The millions of years of evolution are missing. A turtle then and a turtle now look exactly the same. And a lizard then and a lizard now look exactly the same. In fact, the fossil records that show animals supposedly millions of years ago look strikingly similar to the animals we have today. Take a look at the two images of the stingrays. Isn't it amazing how the stingrays that were alive millions of years ago look exactly the same as they do today? Or how about the bat? The image of the bat is supposedly the oldest fossil of a bat ever found. But what does it look like? A bat. It's funny how the evolution that changes a dinosaur to a bird doesn't change the appearance of a bat after all these millions of years. This is not only the case in the examples that I've shown you, this is found in nearly all fossil records. People believe in the use of fossils to prove evolution because fossils are shown of two separate animals that appear similar, and it's said that one must have evolved from the other. But the transitional fossils are missing. Millions of years of mutations and changes and no fossil records to show for it seems kind of suspicious to me. Okay, so what about coal? Coal takes millions of years to form. Therefore, the Earth must be at least millions of years old. What if I said that that statement's false? Coal doesn't take millions of years to form. This statement is just one of the many lies that are fed to the public through the school systems, meant to prove to people that evolution must have taken place, but it's false. Coal can form extremely rapidly under intense heat and pressure. It's done in labs today. The coal made in labs is indistinguishable from the coal that is formed naturally. But the people working in the labs are too naive to realize that if they can do it easily with heat and pressure in labs, perhaps it can be done easily with heat and pressure in nature. One scientist was arrogant enough to state, "We are doing in 10 minutes what takes Mother Nature 150 million years to do." Noel McCullough, Manchester University. Take a look at the image of the bell. This bell was found inside of a lump of coal. The coal formed around the bell. Well, how could this be? The bell is obviously man-made, therefore it couldn't be millions of years old. How would it wind up in coal? Or what about the image of the iron pot you see here? It was found in coal as well. If coal takes millions of years to form, then how could it form around man-made objects? All that's needed for coal to form is heat and pressure. Volcanoes form coal. If someone wanted to think about a quick and easy way to form tons of coal rapidly and disperse it all around the world, they may suggest nearly every volcano erupting at once, followed by some kind of global flood. Yep, that would probably do it. Well, what about valleys? The Grand Canyon is massive. Canyons such as this must have taken millions of years to carve out. Actually, in catastrophic situations, canyons can form extremely rapidly. This is generally found where there is massive flooding in an area, or where volcanoes have erupted. There is one formation actually called the Little Grand Canyon. You can see this in the image here. If a person came upon this formation, they would most likely first say that this canyon must have taken millions of years to form. Well, they would be incorrect. This canyon formed extremely rapidly as a result of a mud flow from the eruption of Mount St. Helens. The following statement was made about the canyon. The canyon produced by the mud has been called the Little Grand Canyon because it appears to be 1/40th scale model of the Grand Canyon. If this can be formed extremely rapidly from the eruption of Mount St. Helens, then why would it take millions of years for the Grand Canyon to have formed? Look at this image of the scablands of Grand Coulee. This massive canyon was also formed extremely rapidly from a dam breach. This is very similar to how the Grand Canyon would have most likely formed. Rather than the Colorado River carving out the Grand Canyon slowly over millions of years, wouldn't it make sense to say that a large amount of water quickly and rapidly carved out the Grand Canyon? Some people may say, well, how would water have the power to carve out a Grand Canyon rapidly? And if it does, why doesn't it happen now? Well, I've already shown you two instances of water or mud rapidly carving out enormous canyons. The way it works would be the same way that a tsunami works. The power of millions and millions of tons of water would rapidly break apart rock and other material. That debris would then flow with the water, breaking up even more material, a domino effect. This would have happened with the formation of the Grand Canyon. All of the rocks and settlements flow with the rushing water to rapidly carve out the canyon. This would account for the fact that nearly every layer of the Grand Canyon has marine life fossilized in it. The theory that is currently accepted by the evolutionist community is that a little bit of water and a lot of time resulted in the formation of the Grand Canyon. Well, they must be working on the assumption that water flows uphill. Confused? Let me clarify. The image that you see is the Grand Canyon. The white you see intersecting the middle of the Grand Canyon is part of the Kaibab upwarp. This area that you see is up to 8,500 feet high at the rim. The area that the water enters the canyon is approximately 2,800 feet high. That would mean that in order for the water to carve out the canyon, the water would have needed to travel 5,700 feet. That's over a mile uphill. That would not show signs of a little bit of water carving out the Grand Canyon. That would show remnants of a large flood, wouldn't it? It's odd that this is so heavily disputed. Mountain ranges. They prove that millions of years have occurred. After all, you don't see mountains casually forming today. That's correct, we do not see mountains forming rapidly today. But we don't see rocks bending 160 degrees either. As you were most likely taught in school, rock doesn't bend, it breaks. You would have learned this when learning about the movement of tectonic plates. When tectonic plates are put under a large amount of stress, they break. This is the same with all other rocks. Knowing this, how would you find bends in the rock up to 160 degrees as shown in this image? Well, the Bible puts forth a very good explanation for this. During the flood, spoke about in the Bible, there were major tectonic shifts in the Earth's tectonic plates. While the layers of sediment were laid down by the flood still moist, the major shifts in the tectonic plates would have shifted the layers of wet sediments, which then hardened. Well, this is just a theory. Both of the ideas are just theories. In one, layers of moist sediments were laid down into extravagant mountain ranges, as shown above, which then hardened. In the other, rock was bent 160 degrees without breaking. Well, I'll leave it up to you. Which one sounds more reasonable? Now, I would like to show you some other evidence that would show signs of a young Earth. According to National Geographic, the human race is 195,000 years old. Okay, then let's do some math. The equation to represent population growth is n equals NOE to the power of RT, where NO represents the initial population, E is a constant number in math, equivalent to approximately 2.71828, R is the rate of population growth per year, T is the time in years, and N is the total population. Well, today's population grows at approximately 1.7%. This is kind of high, so let's reduce the population growth to 0.5%. Okay, let's assume that the population would have started at one person. Of course, we would have needed to start at two people, otherwise reproduction couldn't have taken place. But for mathematical purposes, let's just start with one. Let's see how many people we would have after 195,000 years. The equation would read n equals 1 times e to the power of 0.005 times 195,000. Well, when I do the calculations, it stumps my TI-83 calculator. The number is too large. Okay, let's help the evolutionists out a little bit. Let's assume that the population growth was 0.1%. Significantly less than the population growth we have today. So the equation would read n equals 1 times e to the power of 0.001 times 195,000. Well, that can't be right. The results show that the population would be 4.869 times 10 to the 84th. Let me put that into perspective for you. That is 4,869 with 81 zeros after it. Wow, that's a large number. It's a little larger than the current population of 7 billion people, isn't it? Well, now it's time to test the creationist claim. The human race would have essentially started over again after a global flood about 4,000 years ago. Okay, let's try the equation once more, at population growth of 0.5%. It would read n equals 7 billion times e to the power of 0.005 times negative 4,000. That comes out to roughly 14 people. Wow, 14 people, or somewhere around there, directly after a global flood sounds about right. When you look at it through a biblical standpoint, it makes sense. I've shown you that there's very little evidence to show that the Earth is billions of years old, as needed for evolution to have occurred. I've also shown you that the majority of the proof offered to show that the Earth is billions of years old actually shows signs of a young Earth, and that there was a global flood. Before I continue on, I would like to give you a brief overview of what the theory of evolution actually is. The theory is based off of a few main ideas. At one point, a combination of chemicals and gas and set conditions led to the spontaneous generation of a very simple life form. Then, from there, billions of years of natural selection and the Darwinian process of survival of the fittest led to the evolution of a single-celled organism into billions of species of insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, and mammals, including humans. There is one scientific law that is not necessarily taught in schools. It's the law of biogenesis. This law states one thing: life can only come from life. Well, this is very contradictory to the theory of evolution, isn't it? This one simple law flat out states that life could have never spontaneously formed, as needed for the theory of evolution to actually make sense. Evolution could have never even began. One overwhelming fact that disproves evolution is actually the idea that drives the theory. As new species are created, genetic information is transferred from the two parents to their spawn. As natural selection will show, the dominant traits will continue on to the next generation, and the traits that will inhibit the species, in any way, will most likely lead to the death of the animal. Therefore, the gene will not be passed on. Natural selection is absolutely correct. Over time, species change and adapt to their environment. However, the only genes that change within the species are the genes that were already in the species. No new genetic information is ever gained, ever. It can't happen. The evolutionist theory is that mutations lead to the introduction of new traits. But there are no recorded incidences of mutations introducing new genetic information, because it can't happen. The genetic information was never there, and it cannot just appear out of nowhere. The majority of mutations lead to the animal dying anyway. Adding on to this, for evolution to have taken place, an invertebrate would have needed to give rise to a vertebrate. This means that at one point a species would have somehow gained a spine. Where did this random piece of genetic information come from? Mutation? A species would have needed to randomly form one piece of bone in their back. Somehow this would have needed to benefit the animal, which it wouldn't. The animal would have no use for this random bone. It would have then needed to continue to have this mutation in each new generation of the species, casually adding more and more bone to it until eventually it had a use. And if you think about what the spine actually is, a series of vertebrae that wrap around the nerves in a body, you must take into consideration the fact that the random formation of bone around the nerves in the body would have most likely killed the animal. It would have at the very least impaired it. If a vertebra in a human is misaligned, it severely impairs and can even kill the person. Okay, so this next part is extremely interesting. The point that I'm about to make is so substantial, there's absolutely no possible way to explain it. As you would have most likely learned in your biology classes, there are two types of reproduction: asexual and sexual. The very first life form that would have been formed with the evolutionist theory of spontaneous generation would have been asexual. It would have needed to self-replicate. With asexual reproduction, the genes from one species to its spawn are identical. The genetic traits do not vary, as they do in sexual reproduction. Each offspring is entirely identical to its parent. For evolution to have taken place, the organism that is always identical to its parent would have needed to split up into two separate genders and somehow decide to start reproducing sexually. Just think about that. Not only would the species that doesn't change split up into two separate genders, it would have then realized that it needed to reproduce sexually. And if this ever happened, you would still see it happening today. Some bacteria can reproduce 10 to the 8th power of new bacteria in a matter of 12 hours. Each bacterium is capable of doing that. That number is incomprehensible, and yet you do not find any situations of a bacteria miraculously beginning to reproduce sexually. It never happens. It never happened, and unless the abilities of human science increase dramatically, it will never happen. The idea is absolutely ridiculous. Throughout this presentation, we have learned that carbon-14, claimed to prove billions of years, actually proves that the Earth is under 30,000 years old. The geologic column, which is shown to children all throughout their school careers, is actually non-existent. Animals from the past and animals today look exactly the same, and fossils represent different animals and show no signs of evolution. Coal is formed extremely rapidly, not over billions of years, as claimed by evolutionists. The Grand Canyon proves a global flood, not millions of years. Mountain ranges formed as a result of a flood, not millions of years. And the human population shows that the human race dates back to the time of the flood, not 195,000 years ago. We have also learned that the law of biogenesis shows that evolution could have never started. The evolution from one species to another could not have occurred because new genetic information cannot be gained. And that asexual reproduction proves that evolution could have never even begun to take place. On top of that, we have learned that despite this, society is taught that evolution is fact. They are told that billions of years have occurred and that the Bible is wrong. Our society is raising people atheist, even though modern science is proving the claims of the Bible. This is not only a disgrace to the country, but a disgrace to the Christian religion. The churches need to make this information readily accessible. The Christian community needs to fight back against the lies being taught, not sit back and allow it. God knew this day would come. John 5, verse 46 through 47. But if ye believe not his writings, how shall ye believe my words? God is referring to Moses. Moses writes of the flood, but people are being taught that the flood didn't happen. Moses writes of God creating everything in 6 literal days. I have shown you that billions of years needed for evolution to occur didn't happen. So how did the earth and humans get here? Matthew 24. Take heed that no man deceive you. The school systems are deceiving our children, and the church needs to take a stand for it. 1 Timothy 1, verse 3. Teach no other doctrine. 1 Timothy 1, verse 4. neither give heed to fables and to endless genealogies. Yet we have people being taught atheist beliefs. We are told that the Bible is wrong. 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 21. Prove all things. Hold fast that which is good. I've done some research for you. Now it's your turn to continue to do the research. Learn the facts. Don't sit back and be taught lies. Heed God's warning. Romans 1, verse 20. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, so that they are without excuse. You have some of the facts right here in front of you. Hold tight to them. God says those that do not hold tight to these facts, those who give in to the atheist beliefs being taught, are without excuse. Hell is a scary place. You have to be very careful what you believe in. Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. If you want to know how this earth came about, and how people were put on this earth, read Genesis. If you're not religious, you should still read it. You need to understand that the schools teach lies. The History Channel teaches lies, the Discovery Channel teaches lies, the Science Channel teaches lies. Do the research yourself. Society is being taught that it's a fact that evolution in billions of years have occurred, even though the science shows that it has not. Those who do not take the words of the Bible as fact are at a loss. They have no explanation for the world, and that is why society is being forced into believing these atheist beliefs.
You don't have to modify your belief of the Bible to fit into the theory of evolution. I did. And until I did the research myself, I was willing to defend to the death the theory of evolution. First time I went to see a creationist speak, I argued every statement he made. As I continued my research, I found that everything he said was right. If you're like I was, if you're changing your belief to fit into the theory of evolution, don't get mad. Do the research for yourself. God said that society would teach that the Bible was wrong, but he said the proofs would be evident. I've shown some of these to you. It's up to you to continue the research. And the churches need to make a stand. Trying to debate atheists by saying, well, the Bible says so, isn't going to work. Atheists aren't going to go by what the Bible says. They need proof. They need facts. And the churches need to be able to provide them with these. The reason that evolution is being taught the way it is today is because without evolution, atheists are at a loss.